Welcome, everybody, to another edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and this is a post-game in one of the coaches' boxes at MetLife Stadium. And you know what? I've covered this team for 15 years, and this was about as bad of an afternoon for the New York Giants that I've seen since I've been on the beat. Final score, 30-7. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had come in on a 4-game losing streak, have now extended the Giants' losing streak to 6. And, you know, can go a bunch of different ways here. But in reality, what happened during the game does not speak to the 30,000-foot view of what this performance does to the New York Giants. And that's where we'll go. Daniel Jones was not here. Daniel Jones, when he clears waivers on Monday, will likely, I'd say, you got a good chance at it being a playoff contender for Daniel Jones. Maybe he ends up signing with the Minnesota Vikings, with the Baltimore Ravens, with the San Francisco 49ers. I'd throw the Raiders in there as well. And before we move into this, let's put a bow on the Daniel Jones stuff. All of a sudden, you know, Sunday morning, everybody's talking about this big market Daniel Jones has. Look, the reality is that it's going to cost the team $375,000 to keep Daniel Jones on the roster in practice without the injury guarantee for $23 million. And then if Daniel Jones is on the roster at the end of 6 weeks, or whenever this season ends, if he becomes a free agent and signs elsewhere, that factors into the compensation pick formula. So a team who signs Daniel Jones might get a comp pick out of it. Now, that was not available to the Giants because they would have released him. And once you release a player, that player is not available to be into the compensatory pick formula. So it's been a wild week for the New York Giants, for Daniel Jones, for this franchise in general. And then we end up seeing what we saw today for 3 hours here at MetLife. And the overriding factor that I ended up writing in a post-game column is the fact that several players after the game, from Dexter Lawrence, who was the best player on the team, to Malik Neighbors, who's supposed to be your most promising player as a rookie, called this team soft. And I've been covering football a long time, and you could say in sports in general, but especially in football. To call someone soft, to call a team soft, that is probably the description that strikes a nerve more than any other. I can't think of any other word that you could say to someone. You could say a team sucks, a player sucks, a team's not great in fundamentals, you don't know what you're talking about in terms of X's and O's, you're just not good. But to call a player or a team soft, well, I tell you what, if that doesn't strike a chord with these New York Giants, then it's over. And I know you're listening right now and you're saying, well, wait a minute, Art, it's over. What do you mean by over? Well, I mean by over, first off, as the team itself, as constituted, and which is scary because as Joe Shane talked about in his bye-week press conference, there is a foundation that they believe is built here, that there is not going to be a lot of player turnover for next season. Maybe you're talking 15 to 20 players turnover. And when that is the case, and you talk about this team and players themselves are talking about how soft they are, that's not a good combination. So let me take you to the post-game, and I want to share this with you. I wrote about this in a column on NorthJersey.com, but I want to share it with you here. I left my press seat early usually around 3 minutes to go. If the game is not close, you try to button things up and beat the coaches who essentially sprint both teams. The coaches that are up in the press box, they get to the elevators are hold, then you kind of miss your post-game availability, or at least the start of it. So I leave my seat. I have my story ready. It's 30-7. The score will get changed by someone in the office if the score changes. But most likely everything is written for our live file. I get into the press elevator, and it's myself and the attendant, and the doors start closing, and then they reopen, and one other man steps into the elevator. And right hand to God, it's John Mara, the co-owner and team president of the New York Giants, as you guys are well aware. So besides exchanging of pleasantries and saying hello to John, I knew that was not the moment to start striking up a conversation with John Mara. So I stood with John, watched, and I could pretty much guess how he was going to react. And I just kind of stood there and let it all soak in. And, to me, sometimes in this business, you need to have a little bit of a finesse to it. It's like that foul shooter in basketball. You don't have to bang the ball off the backboard at 100 miles an hour every single time. And I knew I was going to gain nothing in that situation. That was not a media interview situation with John Mara. I did not need to ask John Mara just to be able to get a no comment, or I don't want to talk about football here. So I didn't ask him anything. I think he knew what I was thinking. I've had enough of a relationship with John Mara, even though, despite popular belief, he does not sign my checks. I do not carry water for the organization. But if you want to feel that, as a critic, you're more than entitled to. So John Mara ended up leaving the elevator as we got to the first floor, and we were going in the same direction. So I was walking behind John Mara, I'd say at a relatively brisk pace. Now, here's the deal. I also knew that there were going to be other reporters that were likely staking out John Mara in the area where it was the parking garage, not parking garage, but I don't know why I'm forgetting what I would call it in that situation. It's actually set up outside the tunnel. It's for the security gate for the road team, has to go through the security gates. And I knew that there were going to be reporters down there. So I just wanted to watch and observe. And part of our job sometimes is observation. So I watched, and I walked behind John Mara. And I watched the commotion around John Mara and how everything just seemed to be going on with, who, where, what, who's upset. And there wasn't steam coming out of John's ears. He was just focused, and it was almost like a situation where you put your blinders on. So we get to a certain point. It was really outside of, I believe it was the Anthony Causey photo workroom here. And that's named for our dear friend, the late Anthony Causey, who unfortunately passed away at an extremely young age back during COVID. I believe it was in 2020. So the media workroom, he was a photographer for the New York Post. The workroom is named in his honor. I believe it was right around there where somebody stepped in front of John Mara, and it was somebody kind of decked out in Giants gear. And in that moment, it was grab a handshake, but you step in front of somebody that is looking to just keep going. And in that moment, John Maris kind of snapped out of his pace for a second. And it was Ahmad Bradshaw, two-time Super Bowl champ in the franchise. And John stopped, turned around, gave Ahmad a kind of a half hug, almost like a hello, great to see you, Ahmad, appreciate you for who you are. And then they kind of went their separate ways. Now, Ahmad has been here very often over the last couple of weeks, actually this entire season. He's been here a lot. The Giants leaning on their legends for the 100th season especially. So Ahmad's been around. So this wasn't the first time John and Ahmad crossed paths. But in that moment, it was almost like John snapped out of it and then snapped right back into it and kept walking. Now, as we got to the tunnel, that's where there were waiting reporters. So I was there as well. Then it became a slowing down. John slowed down just enough. There were no football comments. John didn't even have to say it, but the questions were asked immediately. John turned around, wished everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and then kept walking. And that's kind of where I stopped with John Mara. I stayed with the other reporters. So I thought it was kind of, to me, the scene was very interesting. It spoke volumes for me just to watch John Mara and see how things kind of played out, because I've known John Mara long enough here where I know if the result was different on the scoreboard, that John Mara would have been accepting high fives and it would have been this celebration with John Mara going from the press box to the locker room, presumably the locker room. This was different, and it's expected to be different. Your team just got its ass beat for 3 hours. You've now lost 6 in a row. You haven't won at home. You haven't had a lead since the Seattle game on October 6th. You're now days before Thanksgiving. This is not a great scenario for the New York Giants. Now, I think it's also ironic that Ahmad Bradshaw, one of the toughest SOBs that this franchise has had ever in 100 years, you're making a list of tough players in the New York Giants, and you start at the top. I guarantee you don't get to number 10. I don't mean number 10 Eli Manning. I mean 10 without mentioning Ahmad Bradshaw. So to me, it was poignant. To me, if you believe in this kind of thing, I kind of believe, I was being rewarded by the journalism gods in a sense. Also, maybe my brother up in heaven kind of saying, just watch, see how things play out. Because for me, it was poetic. For somebody who's covered this franchise, who tries to keep an open mind, who tries to take a refreshing view every week, and doesn't buy into every week has to be a referendum on where this franchise goes and where they are and what they need to be. To me, this is one of those days where you have to consider what transpired from a 30,000-foot view. And nothing's on the table right now. I know I have fans asking me, do you still support Dable and Shane? You still think they're not leaving? All this stuff. Look, you can question that as early as you want. And Brian Dable got a job security question in week 2. And I believed it was way too premature that week. But I respect other reporters, and I respect the job that everyone has to do. And I truly believe that Brian Dable and Joe Shane are the right guys to get this team to another step. I think they have a lot of young players here. I think you're seeing the youth on some of these players. I think you're seeing when a team gets down on itself, what happens? You start getting accused of being soft, and I think that hurts. I think it hurts a team, hurts the product. But I don't know what's going to happen. I've been in situations where I wasn't expecting the phone call or the text alert or the media statement that the coach has been fired or the general manager has been relieved of his duties. And it's happened enough here. And I can't tell you with certainty it's not going to happen again, because I don't know what John Mara is thinking right now. I think he believes in Joe Shane. I think he believes in Brian Dable. But this team went out and embarrassed itself on Sunday. Germany wasn't an embarrassment. Yeah, it was a brutal loss to a team that had come in as a team that was viewed as worse than you are. And you lost it. And the way you lost it, a fumble for Tyrone Tracy in overtime. Then today, look, that was cosmetic. It sucks for Tyrone Tracy. And I'll try to have more on that tomorrow. I'll talk to Tracy in depth about what it meant for him. You know, he was frustrated. He was not happy. You know, but let's not forget, the best running back in Giants history had a fumbling problem. And it took him a lot longer to admit that he had the fumbling problem than Tyrone Tracy did. So, you know, Tiki Barber can fix his problem. I think Tyrone Tracy has an opportunity, or at least he deserves an opportunity to fix that problem. And Brian Dable kept him out for a series and then put him back in the game. He finished the game. So we'll see what that means for Tyrone Tracy moving forward. But let's get back to that soft thing. Like I said, the Ahmad Bradshaw interaction with John Mara, to me, was just the perfect symmetry between this team and what a guy like Bradshaw represented. It's not to say everybody on this team is soft, but you could be a soft team physically, a soft team mentally. And they were soft mentally today. And they weren't great physically, fundamentally. And yes, that comes down to the coaches. That comes down to the front office and the players you're drafting, and the players you're signing. Maybe you leave yourself short at certain areas and when you don't sign backups and you're looking to kind of plug holes and the way things are. When you play as many young players as the Giants have played, you have to deal with the growing pains. A lot more than you'd like to at this point. So what does that mean? I don't believe this locker room has given up on Brian Dable and the coaches. I don't. I think they have a glass jaw. I think this team has a glass jaw. Last year's did not. Last year's responded in a time like this. When Daniel Jones tore his ACL and you were starting Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor got hurt and all that stuff. This team has a glass jaw, and they need to step up and follow the lead of some players that are willing to talk and willing to step up. But now you got to do it. Talking is not enough. The Giants are severely lacking in certain areas. We know that. Do I put this game on Tommy DeVito? No. I think Tommy DeVito played relatively well given the circumstances. Were they great? No. But I certainly did not believe that Tommy DeVito was all of a sudden going to put this team on his back and all of a sudden lead the Giants to the promised land. Those of you who continue to bang that drum, you're just foolish and short-sighted and maybe trying to get a little bit of attention. Because for the rest of you, you're at the other end of the spectrum. You want to lose games. You want to improve your stock in the draft. But then when they put out a performance like this, you want to almost say, well, guys need to be fired because they can't perform this bad. You want to compete. You want to be close, but you want to lose. So that's not tanking either. Now, you did get a result today that helped you in the draft order. The Tennessee Titans upsetting the Houston Texans pushes the Giants up to number 2 overall in the Tankathon projections. Jacksonville 1, the New York Giants 2. We'll see how the Raiders end up with their game with the Broncos. I had that on in here a little while ago. I don't know what the score is at this point, but it was close. Denver and the Raiders were close. If you're the Giants, you're rooting for a Raiders loss. I'm sorry, we're rooting for a Raiders win to get them further down in the draft. But again, the draft doesn't matter as much as the state of a team does. You have to see where this team is at 6 weeks from now, 6 games from now. I've seen nothing to say, well, Brian Dable needs to be fired tomorrow. Joe Schoen needs to be fired tomorrow. If you want blood and blood is what you want, you're probably not going to get it. But if you do get it, it doesn't solve anything. The reality is that this team needs to get better before the end of the season and has to show that the younger players here have a foundation that they can build off of. If you lose your younger players and you lose Malik Neighbors and you lose Tyrone Tracy, well, guess what? The draft won't matter because you need these players to form a nucleus that once you get the right quarterback in here and you fix certain areas and you call the right plays and you get a defense that can learn how to tackle, that's a player problem at this point. That's not a coach's problem. Sorry. Yes, I know you can't fire the players, so you're going to fire the coach or the coaches. The Giants are in position to make tackles. You miss tackles, either it's an effort problem or an execution problem or both. Make the tackle. You're a professional football player. If you can't make that tackle, get off the field. That's the reality of it. Now, as a head coach or a defensive coordinator or a position coach, you can't get in the locker room at this point and make that statement. How do you make that statement in a meeting room? You lose your player altogether. And that's the balance you have to strike as a coach and team leaders. You need your team leaders to talk about that. You need your team leaders to talk to other players, peer to peer, make it happen. Because if you're a player and you just want a new coach and you want to bail on it, guess what? It never ends up the way you want. It doesn't. I've seen enough. 15 years I've covered the Giants. I've been around a lot of teams. I've been around a Super Bowl team that I watched go from being in the Super Bowl to a year later struggling, trying to figure out how a season in the bottom fell out. And I've seen a lot of losing. So at this point, I consider myself a little bit of an expert as to how things go south. But that's kind of where we're at. So I wanted to mention the Malik Neighbors stuff because I think it's kind of funny that all we heard about and talked about was how Malik Neighbors was a dog, and they need that dog mentality. Brandon Brown, assistant general manager, telling Joe Schoen on Hard Knocks back at the Combine that Malik was that kind of guy. They needed that dog on this team. So now that the dog starts barking after the game, don't think you're all of a sudden going to run the dog out of town. Maybe this is what you need. Maybe it's not ego-driven or completely ego-driven. Maybe Malik Neighbors knows as a rookie who won in college, didn't win everything, but won, has been successful. Maybe you need that dog. Maybe you need that Ahmad Bradshaw type dog. I had a confrontation with Ahmad Bradshaw back in 2012 or 2013, and I had questioned him something. I don't even remember what I questioned him on. At his locker, just kind of looked at me, said, "Who's you? Get the F out of my face," and walked off. You know what? Giants need a little bit of that right now. Not directed at me, not directed at reporters, although some would appreciate that, I'm sure, and run with it. But that's another story for another day. The reality is that this team needs players to be angry. You want to be angry at your coach or your coaches or the front office for casting aside your friend and Daniel Jones? Be angry. But angry doesn't mean you go out there and there's a difference between dog, D-A-W-G, and dog, D-O-G. And the Giants were dogs on Sunday. D-O-G. That's it. Period. And if you want changes, Sometimes you beg for changes. You may be the one that ends up getting the changes, and it may not be what you exactly want. Just keep that in mind. I've seen enough of it in this organization. All of a sudden, you think the grass is greener elsewhere, and maybe it is. But if you want to stay and fight, there's an appreciation to that. And I think that goes from the top on down. I really do. I think they need to recognize the things that have gone wrong right now. This is a very, very delicate situation. You got a game on Thanksgiving against the Dallas Cowboys, who escaped in Landover. Talk about a wild win. They're up 27-20, and then Jaden Daniels pulls off another miracle at the end of the game with a 90-something yard touchdown. And then the Washington Commanders missed the extra point. They end up losing that game. It's not going to be easy on Thursday. You're going to have to step up as a team because your leaders all just agreed that you are soft. You are the New York soft football Giants. Let it sink in. Let it strike that nerve, strike that chord. Because at 2-9, you don't have anybody to blame but yourselves. And that's the reality. Step up, look in the mirror, and realize that what they call you, what they've called you, and what they call you is the worst thing a football team can be called. Let that marinate. So when you go out there on Thanksgiving, the only carving is done on the table of the turkey and not the turkeys that are on the field wearing the 100-year anniversary patch on their jersey. Because that's what you were today. And I've been accused of carrying water, as I said, and I've been accused of defending the Giants, defending this team. You got a lot of problems. You got a lot of problems that are continuing to surface. I think you have some of the good people in place to handle it, but they're not showing it. So if you want to stick around here, that goes from players to coaches to front office execs. You got to do something about it. You got to find a way. You got to fight for your jobs right now because that's the reality of it. And I think, like I said, the Giants are soft. They said it themselves. This isn't me. This isn't other reporters. This isn't the national reporters that everyone gets so upset about all the time. This is your own players. This is your best players. Your players who are leading you, who are doing what they can. You've got a rookie who is not afraid to speak his mind. Yeah, maybe there is a little ego to him. But you know what? Sometimes you need players like that to step up and say something. Dexter Lawrence, he's giving everything you got. When he says you're soft and he's looking around that defensive room, you need to point him out, Dex. You need to make sure that the guys respect you and your word and your play because that's what it's come down to now. Brian Burns spoke up in the locker room afterwards. These are the guys that the Giants should be respecting. And if you don't play that way, yeah, you're disrespecting John Mara and Steve Tisch, and you're disrespecting the 100 years of the New York Giants, and you're disrespecting Joe Shane and Brandon Brown and all the scouts that brought you here and the personnel department, and you're disrespecting Brian Dable and your coaches by the way you're playing. None of that matters. It resonates, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the players that are in that locker room. You are calling yourselves the New York soft football Giants. Go change it. Change it. Those are the changes that need to be made. Not the changes in the coaching staff or the front office. That's the lazy way out. And you know what? You'll get there. You'll get there if you keep playing the way you are. But just don't think that the next coaching staff or the next front office is going to want to keep you around. And then if you end up in another team, there's no guarantee of your place at that other team. So at this point, if you want to change it, you got to change it yourself. If not, changes are coming. They're unavoidable. And you want to be soft and you want to let ownership take that out of your hands, you know what? We're still all in. We're here. And like I've said to many a player, I hope you're here a long time. I want to see you hold that trophy because it's fun. I saw players that I covered, that I liked, that I respected, hold that trophy up over their head and win a lot of games here when they counted. I hope they get to that. But for me, this is a job. And I'm covering this team the best I can and giving you an honest opinion. And that's where we're at. So you want to talk Shedeur Sanders, you want to talk Cam Ward, what should the Giants do if they stay in the top 2 picks, who should be the next quarterback? We've got plenty of time for that. I can do that with you. But I'm also here at the stadium making sure that when I'm talking to players in this locker room and I'm watching and I'm observing with institutional knowledge of this team, I've been down this road. I've watched this team. Don't leave it to chance. Because if you leave it to chance, there will be changes here, and those changes don't always favor everyone involved. And as I've said, this is not me calling for Joe Shane or Brian Dable to lose their jobs. I believe these guys are smart. I believe they can get this team turned around. But I'm not the one out there playing football. There's a team out there. And like I said, they are the New York soft football Giants. Change it. Or John Mara and Steve Tisch will. And if that happens, it's a whole new ball game yet again. And there are no guarantees that they get it right yet again. I'm Art Stapleton. Appreciate you listening. Thanks to Paul Wood. And we will be, we'll see where the show goes this week. We'll see what happens, how many shows we do. It's a short week. I will not be in Dallas for Thanksgiving. I will be home. I will be watching the game. I will do what I can to give you the coverage that you deserve of this team and what my job entails. But just so you know, I will not be in Dallas. And we'll see what transpires over the next couple days. And we'll be back as soon as we can to do another podcast and kind of reset the state of the New York Giants. So thanks for listening. Much appreciated. And everybody have a good night. And again, you want to be soft, you're going to get changes. It's going to happen. But I still think that this team may respond before the end of the season. If it doesn't, then I think changes will come at some point. And if that's what you want, that might be what you're going to get.